There is a stone arrangement in Victoria that may have been tracking the sun's movement across the sky before the first pyramid in Egypt was even planned. I know that sounds like it belongs in a fever dream. It doesn't. The stones are still there. The alignments have been peer-reviewed, and this is not one isolated structure. Across this continent, there are stone fish traps, underground mines, petroglyph fields, and stone archives that have been quietly sitting in plain sight, largely unread by anyone outside the cultures that built them. Here is why this matters in 2026. Platforms like TripAdvisor and mainstream travel guides will point you to Uluru. Fair enough. But there is an entire layer of stone landscape in Australia, documented by archaeologists, listed on the National Heritage List, inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List, that almost never makes it into a standard history lesson or a documentary about ancient engineering. The function of some of these sites is not unknown to traditional owners. What the outside world is still working through is the scale, the age, the engineering precision, and the depth of what was built here. Start with the sky. That is where this begins. On the basalt plains southwest of Melbourne, near the town of Little River, there is a stone arrangement that does not look like much in a photograph. Roughly 90 to 100 stones set in an egg-shaped layout across open grassland. Wurrwurrwuy country. The stones are low to the ground. Some are boulders, some are smaller. From eye level, you might walk past this thinking it was the result of a farmer clearing a paddock centuries ago. That would be a significant misread. In 2012, a peer-reviewed study by Dwayne Hamaker and colleagues examined these stones and proposed that specific stones within the arrangement may mark the setting sun at the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and the equinoxes. That is not a casual observation, that is a structural alignment, the kind of alignment that requires sustained observation of the sky over long periods, the kind of accumulated knowledge that does not happen in a single generation or a single lifetime. What makes Wurdi Youang sit differently than many other stone arrangements documented globally is the combination of elements: the egg-shaped geometry of the full arrangement, the orientation of the site relative to a due west baseline, and the specific positions of outlying stones that correspond to solar events across the calendar year. The 2012 Hamaker et al. Paper remains the most rigorous published examination of the site to date. The researchers were careful with their language. They proposed possible alignments, not certainties. That restraint is itself telling. The data was strong enough to publish. The full picture is still being built. The Wurrwurrwuy people are the traditional owners of this country. The site sits on their country. The question of what Wurdi Youang was used for, whether it functioned as an observatory, a ceremonial space, a teaching tool, or some combination of purposes that outside academic frameworks do not have good language for, is not answered by a single paper. What the paper demonstrates is that whoever set these stones had a working knowledge of solar movement, precise enough to encode it in landscape at a scale you can still read today. There is an honest drawback to visiting this site in your mind's eye. The stones are not tall, the site is not dramatic, and without context the geometry is not obvious. What it requires is not awe at height or scale. What it requires is the realization that someone was standing in this exact landscape, watching exactly this horizon, and leaving a record in stone of what the sky was doing. At a time before any European civilization had mapped this continent, before the word astronomy existed in any European language, as it is now understood. The debate about exact age continues. No definitive date for the construction of Wurdi Youang has been established in the public record. What is established is that the Wurrwurrwuy connection to this country is tens of thousands of years old. The stones carry that depth even when their precise origin date remains open. The sky, at least, does not change. The sun still sets in the same directions. Forget the image of ancient infrastructure as walls and towers. Some of the most sophisticated engineering in human history was built at the waterline, and the Brewarrina fish traps on the Barwon River are one of the clearest examples on Earth. The Ngemba people call them Byamis Ngunhu. The structure is a network of dry stone weirs and holding pens built across the Barwon River near the town of Brewarrina in northwestern New South Wales. In 2005, the site was added to Australia's National Heritage List. That listing is not ceremonial, it reflects documented significance, cultural, historical, and engineering significance that is measurable and on record. The design principle is hydraulic. The weirs and pens are arranged to work with the natural flow of the river rather than against it. As fish move downstream, the stone structures channel them through progressively narrower passages and into holding pens where they can be harvested without destroying the population. This is not a net. This is not a spear. This is a system, a piece of river engineering that manages the behaviour of fish across an entire river crossing. Residents of the Brewarrina area, including members of the Ngemba community, have maintained knowledge of this system through periods when the colonial record largely ignored it. The scale is the part that takes a moment to absorb. These are not a handful of stones placed in a shallow creek. These are substantial stone structures built across a significant river, designed to function across multiple water levels, requiring collective labour, planning, and ongoing maintenance. The weirs needed to be repaired after floods. The holding pens needed to be managed. This is not a one-time act of construction. It is the physical infrastructure of a food system, maintained over generations. What this site directly contradicts is the outdated and incorrect assumption, still circulating in some school curricula, that pre-colonial Aboriginal societies were purely nomadic and did not construct permanent infrastructure. Baiame's Ngunhu is permanent infrastructure. It is stone infrastructure built into a river. It altered the hydraulic behaviour of the Barwon. That is not the profile of a society without engineering knowledge. That is the profile of a society with specific, applied, accumulated expertise in hydrology and fish behaviour. The honest challenge with this site is that the river itself has changed over time. Colonial era modifications to the Barwon's flow and periodic flooding have affected the original state of the traps. What remains is still substantial and still listed as nationally significant, but the full operational picture of the traps at their peak is partly reconstructed from evidence, oral knowledge, and the visible stone record, rather than a complete, untouched original. That reconstruction, it should be noted, is ongoing, and the Ngemba community's knowledge is central to it. Checkpoint A. The next site was built by people managing a landscape so systematically that it took the rest of the world until 2019 to officially recognise what they had constructed. The engineering network covers close to 100 square kilometres. Not a single stone was placed by accident. In 2019, UNESCO added the Budj Bim Cultural Landscape to the World Heritage List. That took a long time, longer than it should have. The Gunditj Mara had been building, using and maintaining this system since long before that inscription. The inscription was the world catching up. Budj Bim is a volcanic landscape in southwestern Victoria, built on and shaped by ancient lava flows from the volcano now known as Mount Eccles. The Gunditj Mara modified those lava flows, the natural rock channels and depressions left by cooling basalt, into a managed network of channels, weirs, ponds and eel traps extending across close to 100 square kilometres of the Tirandara Indigenous Protected Area. The purpose of this system is not a mystery. It was built to farm short-finned eels. The Gunditj Mara created conditions for eels to enter specific areas, move through controlled channels, and be harvested at weir structures. This is aquaculture. Managed, engineered, landscape-scale aquaculture, using volcanic stone as both the raw material and the engineering medium. The system includes stone-walled channels, dams and holding ponds that still exist and can still be read in the landscape today, even after considerable time and significant flood damage in 2022. What the 2019 UNESCO inscription acknowledged is that this aquaculture system is one of the oldest and most extensive of its kind on Earth. Archaeologist researchers have dated some elements of the system to at least 6,600 years ago, based on radiocarbon dating of materials associated with specific eel trap structures. 6,600 years ago. That predates a significant portion of the agricultural and engineering history that typically gets taught in Western school curricula as foundational to human civilization. Ask anyone whose family has worked in the heritage management of this landscape, and they will tell you the same thing. The Gunditj Mara never needed outside confirmation that this system worked. It fed communities for thousands of years. What the UNESCO inscription changed was the global frame, the way this kind of knowledge is officially categorized and protected. It also created new layers of tourism access and land management responsibility, which the Gunditj Mara have been navigating directly. The ongoing challenge for Budj Bim is practical and immediate. The 2022 floods caused documented damage to stone channels and weir structures within the landscape. The recovery and restoration work is both an archaeological effort and a community effort, and it involves decisions about how to balance preservation, traditional management practices, and the demands of a World Heritage designation. The stone is volcanic basalt, dense, heavy, enduring, but water, over time, rearranges everything. What this site represents in the context of global archaeology is a quiet but direct challenge to the timelines and hierarchies built into standard histories of human engineering. An eel farming system that lasted thousands of years, built from lava rock, in a landscape that outsiders classified as wilderness for most of the colonial period. The stones were never hidden. The knowledge was never lost to those who held it. The gap was always in the looking. Checkpoint B. The next site is not an engineering system. It is something harder to fit into a single category. Close to 47 stone arrangements, functioning less like a monument and more like a written record. One of the things they record happened after the 15th century. What a stone arrangement looks like when it is functioning as a visual archive is different from what you might expect. It does not look like a library. It does not look like a museum. It looks, in the northeast Arnhem Land region of the Northern Territory, like a series of stone figures laid out on the ground, forms that represent not only natural subjects, but also historical ones. The Yolnu stone arrangements at Wurrwurrwuy were added to the National Heritage List in 2013. Around 47 stone arrangements have been documented at this site. What makes this group unlike any of the other sites covered here is its function as a visual record of specific historical encounters and objects. Among the subjects depicted in stone are Makassar praus, the sailing vessels used by Makassar traders from what is now Indonesia, who made regular contact with Yolngu communities on the North Australian coast for centuries before European arrival. Think about what that means for a moment. These stones are not recording myth in abstract form. They are recording specific historical contact, maritime trade routes, foreign vessels, the shape of a technology from another culture, set down in stone at a landscape scale. This is a historical record, made in stone, by a society with no written language in the European sense, documenting intercontinental contact that European historians only began to formally map much later. The archive function of these arrangements gives them a different kind of weight than a monument meant to mark a burial site or honour a sky event. These stones are information storage. The 47 arrangements together constitute a layered visual record that spans different periods and different kinds of contact. Some arrangements record natural forms, some record ceremonial content, some record the foreign. The system as a whole is a record of how the Yolnu experienced and chose to preserve their world. Access to Wurrwurrwuy is restricted. This is not an accident or a bureaucratic inconvenience. It is a direct function of the cultural sensitivity of the site. The precise location within northeast Arnhem Land is not publicly advertised, and this script will not specify it further. What the National Heritage List designation does is provide formal legal protection while the site's management remains embedded in Yolngu Cultural Authority. That structure, formal national protection layered over community cultural authority, reflects a more sophisticated approach to heritage management than was standard in Australian policy for most of the 20th century. The honest limitation here, from an outside perspective, is that the full reading of these arrangements belongs to specific Yolngu knowledge systems. An outsider looking at the stones, even with the benefit of the 2013 National Heritage Listing documentation, is looking at the surface of a language they have not learned. The stones communicate. What they communicate in full is not available in a public report, and that is not a failure of documentation. It is the appropriate limit of what outsider documentation can access. There is a peninsula in Western Australia where the density of human marking on stone is so high that no single survey has produced a complete count. That statement is not rhetorical. It is a documented condition of the Murujuga Cultural Landscape on the Burrup Peninsula, north of Karratha in the Pilbara region. In 2025, UNESCO inscribed Murujuga on the World Heritage List. The inscription followed years of advocacy, contested industrial development on and near the peninsula, and a protracted debate about whether petrochemical infrastructure and one of the world's great concentrations of petroglyphs can coexist in the same landscape. The question is still not fully resolved. The numbers at Murujuga are the kind that resist easy processing. Close to 1 million individual rock engravings, petroglyphs, have been estimated across the landscape. Close to 3,000 stone arrangements have been identified within the same area. Shell middens, stone shelters, ceremonial sites, and grinding stones are also part of the documented landscape. The Murujuga Aboriginal Corporation, representing the Ngalama, Yabbarara, Mardudhunera, and Wurrwurrwuy peoples, manages the cultural authority over this country. The petroglyphs themselves span a vast chronological range. Some images are estimated to be among the oldest representational art in the world. Depictions of megafauna extinct for thousands of years, human figures, geometric forms, maritime subjects, and animal species whose presence in this region is itself a record of ecological change over deep time. To look at a Murujuga petroglyph of a thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, extinct on the Australian mainland for well over 2,000 years, and understand that someone stood in this exact place and carved that animal from direct observation, is to feel the actual scale of the human record on this continent. I want to be direct with you for a moment. The framing of Murujuga as a place nobody has explained is only half accurate, and it is worth being precise about which half. The Ngalama, Yabbarara, Mardudhunera, and Wurrwurrwuy peoples have not lost access to the meaning of this landscape. Their cultural knowledge, though not fully documented in any public archive, is alive and in use. What the outside world, the archaeological community, the UNESCO bodies, the broader global audience is still working through is the sheer volume of material and what it implies about the unbroken depth of human presence in this region. The threat to Murujuga is active and ongoing. Industrial operations on and immediately adjacent to the Burrup Peninsula have raised documented concerns about the impact of nitrogen dioxide emissions on the surface of the engravings, the chemical process by which acid rain-like conditions can fade or degrade the patina on rock art over time. The 2025 World Heritage inscription brings increased international attention and legal protection to the site. Whether that protection is sufficient, given the scale of industrial activity already established in the area, is a question that researchers, community members, and government bodies are actively debating as of 2026. What Murujuga represents in terms of scale is something no photograph fully prepares you for. The Burrup Peninsula is not a museum. It is not a single site with a fence around it. It is a living landscape where petroglyphs cover hillsides, boulder fields, cliff faces, and the sides of rocks that people walk past every day. The density of marks per square kilometre is, by documented survey data, among the highest of any comparable landscape on Earth. Reading it from outside is not an act of decoding. It is an act of sustained attention at a scale that takes more than a single visit, or a single generation, to begin to absorb. Checkpoint C. The last site does not spread across a peninsula or a river. It goes down, underground. The extracted material travelled hundreds of kilometres from where it was mined. Someone organised that supply chain. The scale of what was built here is underground. That is the first thing to understand about Wilgie Mia, known in the Wurrwurrwuy language as Thuwarri Thaa, a site in Western Australia's Midwest region. The Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, DCCEEW, describes Wilgie Mia as the largest and deepest underground Aboriginal ochre mine in Australia. That is not a casual classification. That is a formal federal assessment. The site was added to the National Heritage List in 2011. What the listing documents is a complex of underground workings, pits, caverns, excavated passages, dug into rock to extract red and yellow ochre, the iron oxide pigment that was one of the most traded and ceremonially significant materials in Aboriginal Australia. The Wurrwurrwuy Yamatji are the traditional custodians of this country, and their connection to this site runs far deeper than any heritage listing. The scale of the underground workings is the point where this entry requires the disbelief inoculation directly. You might look at the description of an Aboriginal ochre mine and picture something modest, a scraped rock face, a shallow depression. What Wilgie Mia actually contains is a system of excavations that goes deep below the surface, using stone and bone tools, with evidence of sustained extraction over thousands of years. It looks, if you are being honest about the engineering effort it represents, like industrial mining. The material extracted from this site was distributed across trade networks that spanned hundreds of kilometres. Ochre from Wilgie Mia has been traced through archaeological analysis to sites far distant from the Midwest region of Western Australia. Think about what that distribution network implies. It implies organised extraction, organised transport, established trade relationships, and a continental-scale valuation of this specific material from this specific place. The ochre from Wilgie Mia was not generic pigment. It was known. It was sourced deliberately. It moved through networks of exchange across the continent over timescales that dwarf most of what gets called ancient trade in conventional history textbooks. The ochre itself, the reason for all of this, is not merely a paint. In many Aboriginal ceremonial contexts, ochre carries meaning that is inseparable from its physical properties, its colour, its source, its handling. The specific red of Wilgie Mia ochre, derived from the iron-rich geology of that particular location, is not interchangeable with ochre from another deposit. The place matters. The material carries the place. This is why the mine was worked, apparently, over such an extraordinary span of time. Not because it was the only source, but because it was a known, valued, and specifically meaningful source. The honest complication with Wilgie Mia is that the exact location of the site is not publicly advertised for visitor access, and this script does not specify it further than the Midwest region of Western Australia. The site is sensitive, both archaeologically and culturally, and unrestricted public access to an active heritage site of this depth and importance is not the appropriate way to engage with it. The National Heritage List designation provides formal protection, but the living cultural relationship between the Wurrwurrwuy Yamaji and this country is not a function of the listing. It predates it by orders of magnitude. What the underground dimension of Wilgie Mia adds to the broader picture assembled across these 6 sites is depth, literal and figurative. Every other site here operates at the surface of the landscape, on a river, across volcanic rock, on a basalt plain, on a peninsula's boulder fields. Wilgie Mia goes into the ground. The record it holds is not written on a surface the eye can scan. It is carved into the interior of the earth, shaped by hands working in the dark, extracting a material that was then carried into the light and across the continent. That is a different kind of monument. It does not look like anything. It does not photograph dramatically. It does not align with a solstice. What it does is demonstrate, as clearly as any stone arrangement or eel trap network, that the people who built and worked this site had a comprehensive, organised, and long-sustained engagement with the material world. One that operated at a scale and over a duration that the full outside record is still, in 2026, only beginning to account for. The last entry in a list is supposed to be the most extreme. Wilgie Mia qualifies not because it is the most visually dramatic, but because it is the deepest, in every sense of that word. 6 stone sites, 6 forms of knowledge encoded in landscape. One still tracking the same sun it was built to watch. Another reaching hundreds of kilometres through an underground trade network no outside map had charted. Same continent, different depth of record. The question is not whether the people who built these sites were sophisticated. The question is how much of what they built we are only now finding the language to describe correctly. Which of these 6 sites changed how you think about what ancient actually means? Write it in the comments. And if this kind of closer, more careful look at what already exists in the world is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe.